The girl didn't scream when they dragged her off the train. That was the first thing Silas noticed. No struggling, no pleading, just quiet. He stood on the opposite side of the Meridian Bluff platform, hat low, coat collar turned up against the wind off the river. He had come because Hale had sent word, not through threat, through invitation. "You want to understand expansion?" the note had read. "Come see it." Silas had burned the first letter Hale ever sent him. He did not burn this one. He folded it and rode. Now he watched two men escort a girl, no older than 16, down the platform. She wore boots too big for her feet, and a coat that swallowed her frame. No chains. That was new. Progress, Hale would call it. The girl's eyes lifted once. They didn't search for help. They searched for confirmation, for someone who knew. Silas felt that look hit him like a thrown stone. Hale stepped into view from the depot office, hands clasped behind his back, expression almost academic. "You came," Hale said mildly. Silas didn't take his eyes off the girl. "You're bold," he replied. Hale followed his gaze. "Am I?" he asked. "She signed." Silas's jaw tightened. "She signed," Hale repeated calmly. "Employment contract, wages, relocation, room provided." The men led the girl toward the dock warehouse. Silas stepped forward instinctively. Hale's voice cooled slightly. "If you interfere, you invalidate inspection language," he said. "You made it about oversight. This is oversight." Silas stopped. The word sat wrong. Oversight. The girl hesitated at the warehouse threshold, just for half a second. Her hand twitched. Silas saw it. That was not consent. That was fear, dressed in paper. "You coached her," Silas said quietly. Hale tilted his head. "I informed her." Silas turned slowly. "You're selling signatures." Hale's faint smile returned. "Signatures are cleaner than chains." Silas stepped closer. "And if she changes her mind?" Hale's eyes hardened, almost imperceptibly. "She won't." The warehouse door closed. Silas's chest felt tight. He had stepped into auctions before. He had stepped into mills. He had stepped onto trains. This was different. There were no chains to break. Just paper. And silence. "You wanted me to see this," Silas said. "Yes." "Why?" Hale looked toward the river. "Because you're fighting the wrong war." Silas didn't blink. "You think this is about cruelty," Hale continued. "It's about inevitability." "Inevitable," Silas repeated. "Yes." "Like foreclosure?" Hale glanced at him. "Like progress." Silas exhaled slowly. "You're hiding behind contracts." Hale's eyes cooled. "I am offering opportunity." Silas turned sharply and walked toward the warehouse. Hale did not raise his voice. "If you break that door," he said evenly, "she loses her wage and you lose your land." Silas stopped mid-step. There it was. Personal leverage. Not rail corridors. Not investors. The ranch. Eliza. The home he was already losing. "You advance my foreclosure hearing tomorrow," Hale continued quietly. "One signature from me." Silas turned slowly. "You're trading her for dirt." "No," Hale corrected. "I'm offering you a choice." Silas felt the weight of it settle hard. Break the door. Save the girl. Lose the ranch immediately. or walk away. Preserve time. Hope for another opening. The river moved slow behind them. The whistle of a distant train cut across the air. The girl was inside, quiet. Silas's hands curled into fists. Hale watched him carefully. "Redemption is expensive," Hale said softly. Silas didn't speak. He turned and walked away. The warehouse door remained closed. The girl did not scream. Eliza was waiting when he returned to the ranch. She saw it in his shoulders before he said anything. "You saw something," she said quietly. "Yes." "Where?" "Meridian Bluff." Her jaw tightened. "How many?" "One." She studied him carefully. "You didn't bring her?" Silas didn't answer immediately. Eliza stepped closer. "You didn't." He shook his head once. The silence between them stretched. "Why?" she asked softly. Silas met her eyes. "Because he wanted me to." Understanding flickered. "He baited you." "Yes." "And?" "And if I break his warehouse," Silas continued evenly, "he calls the note tomorrow." Eliza absorbed that. "And if he calls it?" "We lose the ranch, immediately." She stared at him. "And the girl?" Silas exhaled slowly. "She signed." Eliza's eyes sharpened. "Under what?" "Contract." She looked toward the horizon. "That's not consent." "I know." Silence again. "Then why didn't you bring her?" she asked. The question wasn't accusation. It was weight. Silas held her gaze. "Because if I move wrong," he said quietly, "he relocates everything beyond reach." Eliza studied him a long moment. "You walked away," she said. "Yes." The word felt heavier than any shot fired in Hollow Bend. She didn't look angry. She looked conflicted. "That's what you did before," she said quietly. Silas felt it hit. Years ago. A barn, a gavel. He had arrived too late. He had not moved. This time he had arrived on time, and still did not move. The difference felt thin. "I'm not done," he said. Eliza held his eyes. "You'd better not be." The next morning, foreclosure papers arrived with new dates. Advanced. 5 days. Hale wasn't bluffing. Silas rode fence line in silence. Survey stakes had doubled overnight. Men were measuring even before land transferred. Pressure. Everywhere. Eliza watched him from the porch as dusk settled. "You're calculating," she said when he dismounted. "Yes." Out loud. Silas leaned against the rail. "If I lose the ranch," he said, "I lose leverage." "Yes." "If I keep the ranch," he continued, "I buy time." "Yes." "And if I buy time, I can't act impulsively." Eliza studied him. "And if you don't act?" He didn't answer. She stepped closer. "Is she still there?" she asked. "Yes." "How do you know?" "I don't." That was the fracture. Not chains. Uncertainty. Hale had learned. He was no longer hiding girls in barns. He was dissolving them into paperwork. Harder to break paper than iron. Eliza folded her arms. "He wants you to doubt yourself." Silas looked at her sharply. "Yes." She nodded slowly. He wants you to feel like you're repeating the past. Silas felt something shift in his chest. Yes. She stepped closer. That means he's afraid of something. Silas studied her. What? You, she said quietly. That night, Silas rode alone. Not to Meridian Bluff. Not directly. He rode east along the riverbank, where dock workers drank after shift. He didn't ask about contracts. He asked about rooms, temporary housing, where relocation labor stayed before assignment. One man mentioned a boarding house 2 streets off the dock. Clean, he said. Watched. Silas nodded once. He waited until well after midnight before approaching. The boarding house windows were dark, except one. 2nd floor, far left. A shadow moved, small. He didn't knock. He circled the rear, climbed the balcony railing slow. The door was locked. He did not shoot it. He slid a thin blade between frame and latch. It gave with minimal sound. Inside, the room smelled of river damp and cheap soap. The girl sat on the bed, still awake, still quiet. She looked up when the door opened, not surprised, just resigned. Silas removed his hat slowly. What's your name? He asked softly. Clara, she whispered. He felt the echo of it, years ago. A different Clara, different barn. Same silence. Do you want to be here? He asked. She didn't answer immediately. They said I'd send money home, she murmured. Did you want to come? Her eyes flickered. They said I had to. Silas stepped closer. Did you sign? She nodded once. He crouched low. Under what? They said my father owed. Debt, of course. Silas felt his jaw tighten. Hale wasn't selling girls. He was buying debt. If you leave, Silas said quietly, they'll say you breached contract. She swallowed. They'll go after my father. There it was. Not chains. Leverage. Silas closed his eyes briefly. Hale had outgrown brutality. He had evolved into precision. Clara, Silas said softly, if I remove you tonight, he accelerates everything. She looked at him carefully. Everything? My land, other contracts, relocation. She studied him. You're choosing, she said. The words landed like judgment. Silas felt the weight of it press against his ribs. He had come to rescue. Now he was calculating consequence. The girl on the bed was not chained. She was bound by threat, which is harder to break. Will you come if I return? He asked quietly. She didn't hesitate. Yes. He nodded once, then stepped back toward the door. He paused. I will return, he said. She did not smile. She simply watched him leave. When Silas rode back toward the ranch under fading moonlight, he understood something he hadn't before. Hale didn't need to win publicly. He only needed to make Silas hesitate. Hesitation erodes reputation. Reputation erodes influence. Influence erodes leverage. And without leverage, you can't stop expansion. Silas reached the porch before dawn. Eliza was awake. You saw her, she said. Yes. And? Silas met her eyes. I'm going to lose the ranch. She didn't flinch. "Good," she said. He blinked. "What?" "You've been fighting to keep dirt," she said quietly. "He's fighting to keep control." Silas studied her. "You think I should let it go?" She stepped closer. "I think you should stop letting him decide your move." The sky began to lighten over the prairie. Silas looked toward the eastern horizon. 5 days until foreclosure. One girl in a boarding room, bound by debt. Victor Hale, waiting for hesitation. Silas felt the old weight again. The barn. The gavel. The moment he did not step forward. He looked at Eliza. "I won't arrive late again," he said. And this time, when he mounted his horse and turned toward Meridian Bluff, he did not ride to observe. He rode to break something. Silas rode into Meridian Bluff just after noon with dust on his boots and a decision hardening in his chest. The river wind carried salt and rot and the faint metallic tang of industry. Barges bumped against the dock pilings. Men shouted over crate loads. Horses stamped near wagons lined up like patient predators waiting their turn. Silas had one plan, not a clean one. Clean plans were for men like Hale. Silas dismounted a block from the boarding house and tied his horse where he wouldn't draw attention. He walked the rest of the way with his hat low, shoulders rounded, moving like another tired laborer drifting through town. The boarding house door was open now. People came and went freely. That was part of the trick. Nothing is watched more closely than a locked room. An open door invites complacency. Silas stepped inside. A woman at the front desk looked up, bored. "You renting?" she asked. Silas let his voice roughen. "Looking for a girl, Clara. Came in on last night's run." The woman's eyes narrowed slightly. "You family?" Silas nodded once. "Father. He don't know she's here." The woman stared a beat too long. Then her gaze flicked toward the hallway and back. "Second floor," she said quietly. "But if she's contracted, you didn't hear it from me." Silas swallowed, contracted. He nodded and climbed the stairs. Clara's door was closed now. He knocked once, soft. Nothing. He knocked again. The latch clicked. The door opened a crack. Her face appeared, pale, eyes too still. When she saw him, her breath hitched. Not relief. Recognition. "You came back," she whispered. "I said I would," he replied. Her eyes flicked down the hallway, then back. "Can I go?" she asked. And the question wasn't hopeful. It was careful. Like she'd learned hope could be punished. Silas stepped inside and closed the door. "Not yet," he said softly. Her expression tightened. He raised a hand gently. "Listen, I can take you now. But if I do, they'll take it out on your father. And Hale will move everything before we can touch him." Clara's shoulders sagged. "So you're leaving me," she whispered. The words cut. Silas felt the old shame rise, hot and familiar. He knelt so his eyes were level with hers. "No," he said quietly. "I'm building a way out that doesn't kill the people you love." She stared at him, searching his face like she was trying to decide if he was another man with a story. "How?" she asked. Silas exhaled. By making Hale believe I'm willing to do something ugly. Clara didn't understand. Not fully. But she understood the tone. What kind of ugly? Silas looked toward the window, where the river glinted like steel. The kind that makes him drop his mask, he said. Victor Hale's office sat above the depot, overlooking the rail yard and the dock routes, like a throne with windows. Silas walked up the steps without invitation. A clerk tried to stop him. Silas kept walking. 2 men in clean coats stepped into the hallway. Not deputies, not law. Private. Silas recognized one of them. Cutter. The supply man from the routes Eliza had mapped. Older now, better dressed, but the same eyes. Cutter smiled like an old knife. Well, Cutter said, heard you've been sniffing around where you don't belong. Silas didn't answer. He pushed past them. The second man grabbed his shoulder. Silas moved fast, twisting the wrist, stepping inside the man's balance, forcing him into the wall hard enough to rattle the framed maps. Cutter reached for his revolver. Silas didn't draw. He grabbed Cutter by the collar and slammed him against the door. Tell Hale I'm here, Silas said low. Cutter's smile faded. You're making a mistake, he hissed. Good, Silas replied. I need him thinking that. He shoved Cutter back and stepped into the office. Hale looked up from his desk as if Silas had arrived on schedule. You returned, Hale said mildly. Silas didn't sit. He stood with his hands open, not reaching, not threatening. Release the girl, Silas said. Hale tilted his head. Which girl? Silas felt his jaw tighten. You know exactly, he said. Hale stood slowly. You are becoming predictable, Hale replied. That is unfortunate. Silas stepped closer. Name your price, he said. Hale's eyebrows lifted slightly. That is, interesting, he said. We've moved from morality to commerce. Silas forced the words out, even though they tasted like ash. Yes. Hale studied him carefully, as if he could hear the lie inside the sentence. You want to buy her, Hale said softly. Silas held the gaze. I want her out. Hale walked to the window, looking out at the yard. You know, he said, this is why your kind always loses. Silas didn't speak. You think the world runs on right and wrong, Hale continued. It runs on leverage. And now, finally, you're speaking my language. He turned back. 10,000, Hale said. Silas didn't blink. He let silence sit just long enough to make it believable. I don't have it, he said. Hale smiled faintly. But you have land, he said, and you have a ranch. Silas's throat tightened. There it is, Hale said quietly. The only currency that matters. Silas swallowed. Write it, he said. Release her. Hale stepped closer. You would sign your ranch away for one contract girl? He asked. Silas forced himself to nod. Yes. Hale's eyes sharpened. You are either noble, he murmured, or you are desperate. Silas didn't answer. Hale walked back to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a document. He slid it across the wood. A land transfer. Not a mortgage. Not a lien. A clean transfer into a holding company Silas didn't recognize. "You sign," Hale said, "and she is released. Her father's debt cleared. You walk away." Silas stared at the paper. This was the moral trap. If he signed, he'd be doing what Eliza had been forced to do. Sign away land under pressure, not by chains. By threat. Silas's hand hovered above the pen. Hale watched him, eyes unblinking. "You'll do it," Hale said softly. "Because if you don't, you'll prove you were never different." Silas felt the room tighten. The pen was heavy. He thought of Eliza at the auction platform, of her scar, of the gavel, of himself walking away years ago. He picked up the pen and signed. Hale's smile widened, satisfied and almost relieved. "There," Hale said quietly. "Now you understand how the world works." Silas placed the pen down carefully. "You'll release her," he said. Hale nodded. "Of course." He rang a small bell on his desk. Cutter appeared at the door, rubbing his shoulder. "Escort Mr. Reed out," Hale said, "and send word to the boarding house. Contract voided. Debt cleared." Silas turned to leave. Then he stopped. Hale's voice softened, almost conversational. "You know what's amusing?" Hale said. Silas did not turn. "You think you just sacrificed for a stranger," Hale continued. "But you've been sacrificing for the wrong girl the entire time." Silas froze. Slowly he turned back. "What did you say?" Hale smiled. "Eliza Moore wasn't chosen at random," he said. "Auctions are not chaos, Mr. Reed. They are supply." Silas felt ice move through his veins. "You were there," he whispered. Hale's expression didn't change. "Not in the barn," Hale said, "but in the ledger, in the planning, in the corridor." Silas stepped forward without thinking. "You organized that auction." Hale's smile thinned. "I organized the aftermath," he corrected. "The land, the displacement, the clearing, the shame that made a widowless rancher pay $20 like penance." Silas felt his hands shake. Hale's eyes held his. "You did not buy her," he said softly. "You were assigned to her." Silas's mouth went dry. "That's impossible." Hale leaned slightly closer. "You believe your guilt is your own," he whispered. "But guilt is a lever, and I pulled it." Silas' chest tightened. He thought of the scar on Eliza's wrist, the crescent scar from 8 years ago, the fire, the wagon. He had believed fate had put him there. Hale was saying it was design. Hale stepped back and smiled again. "You wanted a reversal?" he murmured, almost amused by the wordless shock on Silas's face. "There it is." Silas moved. He crossed the office in 2 strides and grabbed Hale by the collar, slamming him against the wall so hard the framed map rattled. The private men surged forward. Cutter shouted. Silas snarled through his teeth. "You used her," he said. Hale's face remained calm, even pinned. "I used you," Hale whispered back. "That's what's eating you." Silas's fist rose. Eliza's face flashed in his mind. Not violence, control. He lowered his hand slowly. Hale watched him do it. That was the real victory. Hale smiled with blood at the corner of his lip. "You can't hit me," he said softly, "because then you become what you hate." Silas released him and stepped back, breathing hard. Hale adjusted his collar. Cutter looked unsettled now. like even he hadn't known the whole truth. "You signed," Hale said, wiping his mouth. "So your little Clara is free. You should feel good." Silas stared at him. "I will," he said quietly, "when you're in irons." Hale smiled. "Men like me don't wear irons," he replied. Silas turned and walked out without another word, because now he knew. The enemy wasn't local. It wasn't even regional. It had been in the story from the beginning, and it had watched him the whole time. Eliza met him outside the depot office stairs. She saw his face and understood instantly that something had changed. "What happened?" she asked. Silas didn't answer right away. He looked at her like he was seeing her again for the first time. "Hale," he began, then stopped. Eliza's eyes narrowed. "What?" Silas exhaled slowly. "He knew about the auction," he said. Eliza's posture stiffened. "He what?" "He said," Silas swallowed. "He said you were assigned, that the auction wasn't random." Eliza's eyes hardened. The air between them tightened like wire. "You signed the ranch away," she said quietly, more statement than question. Silas nodded once. Eliza stared at him. Not angry, not grateful, calculating. "You did it," she whispered. "You put yourself in the same cage." Silas met her eyes. "I did it to free Clara." Eliza nodded slowly. "And now Hale thinks you're defanged," she said, "because he owns your ground." Silas felt something steady settle. "He doesn't own me." Eliza's mouth tightened into something like a smile, but not warm. "Good," she said quietly, "because now we burn his world down with the only thing he can't relocate." Silas blinked. "What?" Eliza stepped closer. "Truth," she said, and the way she said it told him she already had a plan. That night, Clara appeared at the edge of the livery, coat wrapped around her shoulders, looking like she didn't trust freedom yet. Silas approached her slowly. "You're free," he said gently. Clara stared at him. "You signed," she whispered. Silas froze. "How do you know?" Clara swallowed. "They told me," she said. "They said you'd trade land for me. They said you're not like the others, but you're still a man who buys." The words hit like a whip. Silas knelt. "I didn't buy you," he said softly. "I paid to cut the rope they had around your father's neck." Clara's eyes shimmered. "Is my father safe?" she whispered. Silas nodded. "For now." Clara exhaled, trembling. Eliza watched from the shadows, expression unreadable. Silas felt the moral tension lock in again, the exact discomfort your breakout used. He had done a good act that looked like purchase. He had freed someone through a signature that resembled coercion, and now the audience would question him again. Good. That was the engine. The next morning, Boone arrived. He looked exhausted before Silas even spoke. "We got an inspection window," Boone said. "2 days, then corridor approval moves forward." Silas met his eyes. "Hale's behind the auction." Boone froze. "What?" Silas stepped forward. "He admitted it," Silas said. "He planned it. He planned Eliza. He planned me. Boone's jaw tightened. That's a claim. Eliza stepped forward. He has ledgers, she said. Real ones. Not the ones he lets inspectors see. Boone looked between them. And you're sure? Eliza held his gaze. I'm sure because I recognize his language, she said. He doesn't sell girls. He sells leverage. Silas exhaled. He made me sign the ranch away, he said quietly. Boone's eyes widened. You did what? Silas didn't flinch. I needed Clara out. Boone ran a hand down his face. God help you, he muttered. Eliza's voice was calm. Now we use the signing, she said. Boone looked up sharply. How? Eliza stepped closer. Because when he filed that transfer, it created records, she said. And records can be traced. We don't need to break his safe. We need to follow the paper. Silas stared at her. She was right. Hale's world ran on contracts. Contracts left footprints. Boone nodded slowly. If we can tie him, he said, we can bring Federal. Eliza's eyes sharpened. And if Federal won't move fast enough, she said softly, we force daylight. Silas felt the stakes rise. They were no longer chasing trains. They were chasing the architecture of corruption. If you've stayed with this story through the moment a man signs away his land to save a stranger, you understand the twist isn't about guns. It's about who's been pulling the strings since the beginning. And now, with Silas's ranch gone on paper, and Hale certain he has won, the real question becomes simple. What does a man do when he realizes his redemption was engineered? The paper moved faster than horses. That was the first lesson Silas learned after signing the ranch away. Within 24 hours, the transfer had been recorded under a holding company with a name that sounded harmless, Meridian Development Trust. Within 48, survey crews returned to the Reed land and replaced the broken stakes with iron posts hammered deep enough to hum when struck. Silas stood at the edge of his former fence line and watched men measure ground he had once walked at dawn with coffee in his hand. It did not feel like loss. Not yet. It felt like bait. Eliza stood beside him, coat collar lifted against the wind. He thinks you're done, she said quietly. Yes. And that makes him careless. Silas nodded slowly. Because Hale had made one mistake. He had assumed Silas signed out of desperation. He had not considered that a man who once paid $20 in shame might sign land away in strategy. Boone rode in just before noon with a folded stack of papers in his saddlebag. We traced the holding company, he said without preamble. Meridian Development Trust is layered through 2 shell outfits in Ashford and 1 in Stonefall. Silas took the papers. And? He asked. Boone's jaw tightened. And all 3 list Victor Hale as silent beneficiary. Eliza exhaled slowly. That's not enough, she said. No, Boone agreed. Not unless we tie it to coercion. Silas looked toward the rail cutting across the horizon. Clara's father, he said. Boone nodded. We found him. Clara's father lived on a strip of land barely large enough to justify a fence. The house leaned left, as if even the foundation had grown tired. He opened the door slowly when Boone knocked. His eyes were red, not from drink, from worry. They told me she was working, he said immediately, before anyone asked. Silas stepped forward gently. She is free, he said. The man's shoulders sagged. "They said I signed debt transfer," he whispered. Eliza's eyes sharpened. "Under what?" she asked. The man handed over a folded contract. Silas read it carefully. The language was clinical. Agricultural equipment financing. Missed payments. Labor guarantee clause. Debt satisfied upon completion of term. Term unspecified. There it was. The rope. Signed under threat of foreclosure on land that had never been fully assessed. Hale hadn't just bought debt. He had manufactured it. Boone looked at Silas. "This ties coercion to land transfer," he said quietly. Silas nodded. "And to the corridor," Eliza added. Because if Hale was inflating debt to push families off parcels before survey approval, then every voluntary signature along the rail was contaminated. This wasn't relocation. It was orchestration. Silas folded the contract carefully. "We take this to Meridian Bluff," he said. Hale was not surprised when they returned. He stood at the dock office window again, watching barges glide slow across the water. "You are persistent," he said without turning. Silas stepped into the room. Boone followed. Eliza closed the door behind them. "We found the debt trail," Boone said evenly. Hale turned slowly. "Debt is not illegal," he replied. "Manufacturing it is," Eliza said. Hale's eyes flicked to her. "You misunderstand scale," he said calmly. "Some men drown in numbers. Others swim." Silas stepped forward and placed Clara's father's contract on the desk. "You inflated equipment valuation," he said, "then structured labor as repayment." Hale glanced down at the paper. "That is called leverage," he said. Boone's hand rested near his holster. "It's called coercion," he replied. Hale's smile returned faintly. "You believe federal jurisdiction will dismantle a corridor funded by half this state?" he asked. Silas didn't blink. "No," he said. Hale studied him. "Then what do you believe?" he asked. Silas stepped closer. "I believe you're afraid of spectacle." Hale's eyes hardened almost imperceptibly. "You mistake me," he said. "Do I?" Silas replied. "You moved auctions out of barns. You replaced chains with contracts. You relocated warehouses before inspection. You don't fear law." He leaned closer. "You fear exposure." The room tightened. Hale's composure thinned just slightly. Boone stepped forward. "We have enough to delay final corridor approval," he said. "Enough to trigger public review." Hale's jaw tightened. "Public review invites chaos," he said. "Good," Eliza replied quietly. Silas watched Hale carefully. There it was, the crack. Not in his control, in his image. Hale did not want to be seen as predator. He wanted to be seen as progress. "You overestimate your reach," Hale said finally. Silas shook his head. "No," he replied. "I underestimate your ego." The silence stretched. Then Hale did something unexpected. He laughed. Not loudly, but genuinely. "You want spectacle?" he said softly. "Fine." He stepped to the door and opened it. "Gentlemen," he called down the dock. Workers looked up. Clerks paused. River hands slowed. Hale gestured toward Silas. "This man accuses Meridian Development of coercion," he announced calmly. "Of corruption. Of human trafficking." Murmurs spread. Hale turned back to Silas. "Say it," he invited. Silas felt the moment tilt. This was the mirror of the barn. A platform. eyes watching. A public test. He stepped forward. Yes, he said clearly. You engineered debt to clear land. You structured labor to mask trafficking. You profited from displacement. The doc went quiet. Hale's face remained composed. You signed your ranch to us voluntarily, he replied evenly. Silas didn't hesitate. Yes. A ripple moved through the crowd. Hale smiled faintly. Under no threat, he added. Silas looked directly at him. Under threat of harm to a girl's father, he said. More murmurs. Clara's father stepped forward from the edge of the dock, where Boone had placed him quietly before. His hands shook. They told me my land would be seized, he said hoarsely. They told me she'd work it off. Eyes shifted. Workers looked at Hale differently now. Not in fear. In calculation. Hale's voice sharpened. This is sentimental manipulation, he said. Eliza stepped forward. No, she said quietly. It's pattern. She lifted a second contract Boone had retrieved from another displaced family. Then a third. Silas watched Hale's composure thin. Not panic, but irritation. Control was slipping from abstraction into narrative, and narrative spreads faster than rail. You are making enemies you cannot manage, Hale said coldly. Silas held his gaze. You already did that, he replied. Hale's jaw tightened. He took one step forward. You think arrest ends me? He asked softly. Men like me build systems. Silas nodded. And systems collapse when people stop believing in them. The dock workers were no longer murmuring. They were staring. Hale saw it. The shift. Not legal defeat. Reputational fracture. He turned sharply. Cutter, he said. Cutter stepped forward. Remove them. Cutter hesitated. Just a flicker. Enough. Hale saw it too. Trust eroding. That was the wound. Boone stepped forward with federal marshals, emerging from behind stacked crates, summoned before Hale had opened the door. You're under investigation pending corridor review, Boone said evenly. Hale did not resist. Not yet. He looked at Silas one final time. You think this is victory, he said softly. Silas didn't answer. Hale's eyes flicked toward Eliza. You were never random, he told her quietly. Remember that. Eliza met his gaze without flinching. I know, she said. Hale allowed himself to be cuffed, not because he was beaten, because he understood timing. He would fight in court, in committees, in quiet rooms. But something irreversible had happened. He had been seen. The foreclosure hearing resumed 3 days later. Meridian Development Trust attempted to finalize acquisition of the Reed Ranch, but corridor approval was suspended pending review, and federal investigation into coercive labor contracts triggered asset freeze. The transfer halted mid-process. Silas stood in the courthouse with dust still on his boots. The clerk read the notice. Pending investigation, asset consolidation paused. Paused, not reversed. Paused. Silas exhaled slowly. Eliza stood beside him. You may keep it, she said quietly. Silas looked at her. I signed it away, he said. She nodded. And that's what makes this clean. He understood. He had not clawed it back. He had let it go. Which meant if it returned without coercion. That was the difference. Weeks later, Hale sat in a smaller office under review. Not broken, not ruined, but watched. Corridor approval amended. Independent labor oversight embedded. Debt audits initiated. The system had not collapsed, but it had bent, and bending slows momentum. One evening, as wind moved low across the prairie, Silas stood at the fence line with Eliza. Survey stakes remained, but iron posts had not yet replaced them. The land was still technically his, for now. "You'd sign it again," she said quietly. Silas looked at the horizon. "Yes." She studied him. "And that scares you?" "Yes." Because that was the moral center. He would sacrifice again, but not blindly. Not out of shame. Out of choice. Eliza stepped closer. "He thought he engineered you," she said. Silas nodded slowly. "He did." She looked up at him. "But he didn't control what you became." Wind moved through the tall grass. No chains, no gavel. No warehouse door. Just open land. If you've stayed through auctions and signatures, and a man signing his home away to break a larger cage, you understand this isn't about rail lines. It's about who gets to decide what a person is worth. Silas had once paid $20 and hated himself for it. Now he had signed away everything and did not. That was the difference. Redemption isn't the absence of cost. It's the refusal to let someone else calculate it for you. The sun dipped low behind the hills. Eliza watched the light fade. "What happens next?" she asked. Silas looked toward the rail. "They'll try again," he said. "Yes. And we'll be here." The prairie stretched wide and quiet. Not safe. Never safe. But no longer owned by silence. And this time, if a door closed, Silas Reed would not stand outside, calculating. He would step through. Before the gavel fell.